Ever get the feeling that, like, when we think about saints, we kind of picture them as being, well, perfect. Like, they were born with those halos already in place.
Yeah, it's almost like they were destined for sainthood from day one, right?
Exactly. So, this article you shared, the one about problematic saints, that's what really caught my eye. It makes you wonder, how do these figures, these people who maybe weren't always on their best behavior, how do they fit into that whole saintly image?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? And the article does a good job, I think, of showing how, in the Orthodox Church especially, being a saint, it's not about being flawless.
Right, right. It's not like this checklist of good deeds you got to rack up to get into heaven. So if it's not about perfection, then what are we really talking about here when we talk about sainthood?
Well, in the Orthodox tradition, it's more about God's grace working through people, even, and this is the key part, even through people who have, flaws. The article starts off with St. Pullman of Palestine, and his story really gets you thinking about that whole God works in mysterious ways thing.
Okay, yeah. Now, St. Pullman, he wasn't exactly what you'd call a model citizen, right? At least from what I remember reading.
Yeah, not exactly a goody two-shoes.
Yeah.
In fact, the article almost portrays his death, which was pretty dramatic, as this kind of cosmic payback for some of the things he did.
It's like the universe was setting things straight. And it makes you think, what does it really mean to be holy? Are we just looking at someone's actions? Or can God's grace really work on the inside, even if someone's outward life doesn't exactly scream saint material?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it brings us to this other group the article talks about, the saints who live double lives, pretending to be monks. You've got figures like Marina, Theodora, Eugenia, Euphrosyne.
Wow, so they were venerated by the church, meaning recognized as saints, even though they basically lived a lie? That's pretty wild when you think about it.
It is. It makes you wonder, like, what was going on there?
Yeah.
But the article stresses that their struggles, their eventual repentance, that's like the heart of their stories. It's not just, oh, they deceive people, but it's okay. It's more like they wrestled with those choices and they wanted forgiveness. They even faced consequences, which I think highlights how seriously the church takes those actions, even if they ultimately became saints.
So there's not a free pass just because they turned things around. Their repentance, it was a whole process. Makes you wonder, though. I mean, does that mean any action, no matter how bad, is forgivable as long as someone truly feels sorry afterward? Like, what if I robbed a bank on, say, Tuesday and then had a huge change of heart Wednesday? Am I on the fast track to sainthood?
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's maybe not go from saints to bank robbing just yet.
All right, fair enough. You got me there. But, while we're on the topic of things that make you go, speaking of things that make you go, the article also brings up this whole other angle about how, like, the culture and politics of the time, they might actually play a role in who gets that saint stamp of approval. What do you make of that?
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. I mean, it's not like the church exists in a bubble totally separate from everything else going on in the world, right?
Right. But how do you even begin to unpack that? It seems like it could get really subjective really fast.
It totally could. And that's where figures like Saint Marie of Paris come in. She's one of the examples the article talks about. And her life story, let me tell you, it's a wild ride.
Okay, lay it on me. What makes her story stand out?
So, get this. She was a Bolshevik sympathizer, married not once but twice. And during World War II, she was putting her neck on the line to help Jewish people escape from the Nazis in France.
Wow, that's a resume. I mean, talk about a complicated path. I can't imagine that was exactly the typical saintly trajectory a few hundred years ago.
That's exactly the point the article's trying to make, I think. They're saying, look, her canonization happened pretty recently in 2004, so you could see it as a reflection of how maybe the church's values are changing, or at least how they're looking at sainthood these days.
Okay, I see what you mean. But then, to play devil's advocate for a sec, the article also mentions Tsar Nicholas II and the whole royal martyrs thing. Their canonization feels like it taps into a totally different set of values, right? Like martyrdom, tradition, monarchy. Not exactly the most modern concepts.
You're totally right. It's like two sides of the same coin. The article is basically saying, look, it's not as simple as the Orthodox Church just becoming a mirror for whatever's popular at the moment,
Yeah.
because you've got Tsar Nicholas II, right, and his family, venerating them despite all the controversy surrounding their reign and how they died. That gets at something deeper, I think.
It's almost like the church is constantly trying to balance these timeless ideas of faith with the reality that the world is constantly changing. And it's a tough act.
It really is. And that's what makes this whole conversation so fascinating. The article doesn't try to shy away from that tension, from how faith and the world outside are always pushing and pulling on each other. In fact, they bring up another figure who really embodies that, Theodora, the wife of Emperor Justinian the Free.
Ah, yes. Theodore. Now, there was something, what's the word? Unconventional about her past, wasn't there?
That's putting it mildly. The article talks about how she might not have been the most orthodox believer early on, and let's just say she had a past, but there she is, venerated as a saint. So it really makes you think, is there a point where a church trying to, I don't know, fit in with the times even a little bit, does that become a problem?
That's the million-dollar question, right? When does trying to stay relevant cross the line? Is there even a line? It's like we're trying to put together a puzzle and someone swapped out half the pieces for something totally different. These problematic saints, they really make you rethink that whole idea of what it takes to be, well, saintly, you know?
Totally. And the thing is, the article uses these figures, these saints who don't quite fit the mold, to kind of challenge what we think we know about sainthood. It's not about saying, oh, they were perfect, put them on a pedestal. It's more like, hey, look how God's grace works, even in these messy, human, sometimes even kind of scandalous lives.
And isn't that kind of the point? Like, their imperfections, their flaws, the times they messed up, that's what makes them relatable, right?
Exactly. And I think that's a really powerful message. It's like,
Yeah.
if these people, with all their baggage, can find their way to sainthood, then it gives the rest of us some hope. You know, we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of God's love.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of thinking, oh, saints, they were practically superhuman. But when you see them as real people with real problems, real failures, it just hits different. It's more powerful that way.
And that's where the article leaves us with this really interesting thought. It basically says, if these problematic saints make us uncomfortable, then maybe we need to ask ourselves why. What is it about their stories that kind of rubs us the wrong way? What does that say about how we see faith, how we see imperfection, even how we see the church's place in history?
It's like holding up a mirror, isn't it? It forces us to confront the parts of our faith, of history, maybe even of ourselves, that we'd rather not look at too closely.
Yeah, it's an invitation to really sit with these stories, not as some kind of ancient fairy tale or a Sunday school lesson, but as a chance to learn something about ourselves, to grow a little bit.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive. Seriously, you've given me so much to think about sainthood, about how faith and culture are always tangled up together, even about my own journey. Thanks for breaking it all down with me.
Anytime. It's always a blast to dig into this stuff.